Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections, along with a daily mains answer writing program. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to the importance of urban resilience in the overall planning and development. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the increasing instances of human-wildlife conflicts, the causes, impacts, and the way forward. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2026, along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to climate resilient urban framework. In the last 2-3 decades, whenever we have talked about the aspects of urban planning and development, especially in the context of Asia and particularly in the context of India, we have often talked about the concepts like smart cities, providing world-class infrastructure in terms of urban amenities, for example, the roads, the mass rapid transit systems, or electricity. But the question arises that are our cities capable of handling the ill effects of climate change? See, we all know that especially since the start of the 21st century, the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events has been increasing. Extreme weather events, for example, the cyclones, urban floods, droughts, heat waves. So this poses a very important question, that are our cities in a condition to manage the ill effects of climate change? We have a particular editorial which has been published in the Hindu, where the author says that world over we have different indices which basically measure that what is the kind of quality of life or how prosperous different cities are around the world. For example, the Global Livability Index or the index published by the UN Habitat. But what the author says is that these indices, they fail to factor in, they fail to incorporate the aspects of urban resilience. Now, see, why this becomes important is the reason that especially in the continent of Asia and especially in a country like India, we have a lot of vulnerable sections, poor people, who are more prone to these disasters. Therefore, it is very important to incorporate the aspects or the principles of urban resilience in the overall planning and development. So this topic becomes very, very important. As always, the discussion is going to be very comprehensive. We'll talk about what do we mean by urban resilience, why it is really important for a country like India, what are the issues or what are the loopholes with respect to India, and what should be the way forward. Very important component of GS1 urbanization and GS3 climate change environment. Now, let's talk about what do we mean by urban resilience. See, it refers to the capacity of cities, the urban areas, to anticipate, to predict, to absorb, adapt, and recover from climate shocks and stresses. For example, the cyclones, the droughts, urban floods, heat waves, without collapsing the essential urban services, making sure that these events do not hamper the delivery of the urban services. That is what urban resilience is all about. Now, see, what it incorporates. It has certain core elements. What are those core elements? The very first is physical resilience. That is providing that kind of infrastructure which is able to bear the consequences of extreme weather events. For example, let's say we have earthquake. Are our buildings in a condition to bear the effects of the earthquakes? That means that we need to focus upon the building codes, right? Drainage systems. Next aspect is that of social resilience. Are our cities in a condition to provide productive livelihood opportunities, employment opportunities to the youths? Are our cities in a condition to protect and to secure the lives of the elderly population, what we call as geriatrics? Right? Are our cities safe for the women? Next, we have institutional resilience. That what is the kind of governance framework we have in the cities? When we talk about the fund management in the systems or how efficiently the service delivery is taking place in the cities, that is what is counted in the institutional resilience. Then we have ecological resilience. For example, in terms of how well the green belts in the cities are being maintained. Near the Karol Bagh, we have the ridge area in Delhi. How effectively that is being maintained, or how effectively the wetlands or the floodplains are being maintained. That is what you'll have to understand. See, again, one thing which I would like to emphasize here is I give you the examples so that you can incorporate those examples in the answers. Not everything is to be written over here, right? So this is for the explanation purpose. I do not want to bombard the data and the facts on you. Use it so that you can increase the credibility of your answer, of the point you are making. Now, why there is a need to focus upon the resilience? Why this aspect of resilience becomes very important? See, we have 4 major metros: Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, and Chennai. Now, when you look at these 4 cities, they are almost similar when we talk about the modernity and livability aspect. But they differ in the ways that how much each of these cities is able to bear the consequences of the ill effects of climate change. Some cities are better prepared, others are not. So there is a difference. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a critical lacuna. There's a gap. Because when we look at the modernity aspect, the livability aspect, almost all these 4 cities appear same. But when we talk about how much pressure they can bear with respect to the ill effects of climate change, for example, let's say the urban flooding or the cyclones, over there the differences arises. So the definition of modern urban life, it has to be re-evaluated. That we need to incorporate the other factors also if we are going to evaluate that how modern the city is. Why we are talking about this is because in this particular article, the author says that there are limitations with respect to the global urban indices. He has talked about 3 important indices. The first is the UN Habitat City Prosperity Index. The second is the Global Livability Index. The third is the City Resilience Index. What he is trying to say is that we talk about various factors. In these indices, we have talked about the infrastructure. We have talked about the productivity. We have talked about the health aspect, right? But again, we have ignored some of the very important areas. For example, what he says is that in all these 3 indices, we have ignored the aspects of drainage. That what is the drainage capacity of different cities? Why drainage capacity becomes important? Let's say you have a particular city which has a drainage capacity of handling X liters of water. Now, let's say you have urban flooding, right? Torrential rains. And the rains overwhelm the capacity of the drains in that particular city. So that becomes important. Next, what the author says is that one more aspect is not catered to by these indices. For example, that in the hill slopes, what kind of infrastructure is made? Because in the hill slopes, what you would obviously know is that the slopes are very unstable. But still what we are witnessing is a lot of infrastructure development is taking place in these hill slopes. Next, what he says is that there are aspects of informal housing, for example, the slums. So these things have not been factored in these important indices. So if we really want to know, that is very important to understand. If we really want to know that how much prosperous our cities are, we'll have to factor in, we'll have to incorporate the other factors, as I told you, right? Because we cannot just focus upon these smart cities. We cannot just focus upon providing the world-class infrastructure. Because since the start of 21st century, we have been witnessing the increasing intensity and frequency of the extreme climate events, weather events, right? So the climate considerations must be incorporated in the overall urban planning and development. You must integrate these aspects. That is what you'll have to understand. Why? So the author has also given the examples from various Asian cities. What he says is that especially in the Asian context, we are very vulnerable, primarily because that the effects of climate change they have been quite pronounced because of the various topographical and climatological factors, plus the kind of demography we have, the kind of population we have. Most of the people in this particular region, they are poor. So they are more vulnerable. That is what you'll have to understand. He talks about the cyclone Ditwa in Sri Lanka, which has flooded and which has led to a lot of landslides in Colombo. Then he also talks about in Indonesia, there has been massive flooding in Sumatra. Then he also gives the example of Thailand. Over there we have a city, Hatyai. What he says is that in this particular city, after centuries, there has been a kind of flood, torrential rains, right? Then in Philippines, because of a particular typhoon, the cities of Cebu and Visayas, they have been flooded. So you can use these as examples that how these extreme climate events are affecting the overall populations in various cities around Asia. One thing which you'll have to also understand is that all these cities, they are economically very well integrated, domestically and internationally. So if we just look at the economic aspect, they're performing very good. But have we factored in, have we incorporated the aspects of climate resilience? That is a question which the author is asking. Now, why urban resilience is especially critical for India? Understand, when we talk about urbanization, India, especially after the LPG reforms of 1991, we have been witnessing rapid urbanization. Even if you look at the data, according to the United Nations Population Fund Agency, what it says is that in the year 2023, the urban population of India was 38%, and it is supposed to go to almost 68% by the year 2050. So the kind of transformation or the kind of increase we are going to witness in the urban population, that is huge. So we'll have to prepare ourselves, right? Then economic contributions. We often call cities as engines of growth. More than 65% of the GDP is contributed by the cities in the country, right? Next aspect is that India is a country which has high climate vulnerability. According to the National Disaster Management Authority itself, what it says is that more than 75% of the Indian districts, they have one or the other form of hotspot, climate vulnerability hotspot. So that itself makes these districts very vulnerable, right? Then the weather patterns. We have been facing the increasing intensity of the cloud bursts, for example, in the hilly states, or for example, we have the urban floods, or let's say the droughts. It has been increasing, right? The weather patterns have been changing quite frequently. Then high economic losses, according to the World Bank itself. Because of the climate change and the disasters, India loses almost 2 to 2.5% of GDP annually. And almost because of urban flooding, we lose 40,000 to 50,000 crores because of the urban flooding aspects. So that is the gravity. That is the seriousness of the situation. Therefore, urban resilience becomes very important, especially for a country like India. What are the causes of low urban resilience in India? Why our cities are not that resilient? There are reasons. Outdated grey infrastructure. Let's talk about Mumbai or Kolkata. What you'll have to understand is, or even Delhi, most of the infrastructure, most of the basic infrastructure is of colonial origin. It's almost 80 to 100 years old. Now that is not in a position to match the requirement of the current times. Talk, for example, the drainage systems we have. So that is not able to handle the kind of pressure we are having. That is what you'll have to understand. Also, what you'll have to see is that let's talk about the drainage aspect. So in this particular column, what the author says is, when we talk about the drainage capacity of some of the very important cities in India, for example, the Kolkata or in Mumbai, what the author says is that we have a capacity of almost handling 100 mm of rainfall per day. The drainage system can handle only this much amount of water. But whenever we are witnessing the excessive rainfall, the urban flooding, that increases or that breaches 300 mm per day. Now, it is beyond the capacity of these drainage systems, and that's the reason we have witnessed urban flooding, for example, in Mumbai, right? Or for example, in Chennai. That is what you'll have to understand. So it overwhelms the drainage capacity. Then the construction in high risk zones. What we have been witnessing is the encroachment of green spaces, the pristine regions, the wetlands in the cities, the controversy with respect to the RA forest you must have heard about, or the Kancha Bauli forest in Telangana, in Hyderabad, right? So we have encroached these spaces, primarily because there is a nexus between the local authorities, between the real estate agents. So they have been exploiting these ecological regions, right? The CRZ, coastal regulation zones, they have been flouted. They are not being followed in letter and spirit, right? Then we have the informal urbanization. You must have seen that we have the Dharavi slum or the slum areas in Delhi. So especially these slums, they do not have even the basic minimum urban amenities. So that increases the vulnerability of the people who are living in these areas. What happened in the pandemics, right? You must be aware that they do not have the basic water facilities or the hygiene facilities, WASH, what we call as water sanitation and hygiene, right? Then we have fragmented urban planning. The master plans with respect to these urban cities, they focus upon the roads, the railways, the electricity lines, the mass rapid transit systems, but they neglect some of the very important aspects of ecological restoration, of making sure that the green belts are protected, of making sure that the wetlands or the floodplains are not encroached. These are some of the very important issues. Then what you'll have to understand is we also have issues with respect to, as the article points out, that there are issues with respect to the inequality and climate justice also in urban India. A very, very good example which can be quoted. We have the poor households in the urban areas who mostly live in these vulnerable regions near the river banks, low-lying areas. Now, these are the areas which are more prone to the effects of disasters, right? Whereas we have the rich households who live in gated communities, posh colonies. They're all secured. So that also increases, it deepens the division between the poor and the rich. So you can link the effects of climate change with respect to deepening social inequality, right? The result is that the climate risk, it is socially transferred downward towards the poor people. Because what you'll have to understand is that the poor people have more exposure. Plus, what you'll have to see is that they have zero insurance. So the cumulative result of these two factors is that they're more vulnerable to disasters, the impact of disasters, right? Now, when we talk about India's key urban climate risks, what are the hazards? The very first is urban flooding. 2005 Mumbai, because of the inadequate and the obsolete drainage systems, that resulted into the flooding in Mumbai. Many people died. Or take, for example, Chennai in 2015. What happened? We have the Adya River in Chennai. The parts of the river, they were encroached, and it led to the lessening of the capacity, the water carrying capacity reduced in the Adya River. And it ultimately, it was one of the very important causative factors of the flood in Chennai. Then we have the cyclones. The recent, right now what we are witnessing is cyclone Ditwa. It has affected the southwestern parts of the country near Tamil Nadu. Or the recent cyclones of Monta. So that has, in one way or the other, if not on the life, it has effect on the property, right? Then we have the heat waves in the year 2022, 23 and 24. We had the declaration of severe heat waves that had an impact, especially on the gig workers, on those people who stands on the roadside for their employment opportunities. Then we have the landslides. You must be aware of what is happening in Uttarakhand or Himachal Pradesh. So there have been frequent incidents of landslides. Then we have the sea level rise, especially in the parts of Mumbai, Kolkata, Kochi. That is affecting the fishermen community or that community which lives on the coastal regions. Then we have the GLOF events, glacier lake outburst floods, the Kedarnath floods, disaster of 2013, or the recent disaster in Sikkim. What it points towards is that because of these events, though these events, the climate events, though they may happen in isolated locations, but they also have effect on the urban areas. That is what you'll have to understand. Now, what is the institutional and policy framework for urban resilience in India? When we talk about the disaster risk governance, the primary statutory framework with respect to the preparedness, with respect to the adaptation and mitigation, with respect to the prevention of disaster is mentioned in Disaster Management Act of 2005. Then we have the National Disaster Management Authority, which is chaired by whom? Let me know in the comment section. That NDMA is chaired by whom? Which basically comes with various guidelines with respect to the management of cyclone, with respect to the management of heat waves, heat action plans, or the industrial disasters, chemical disasters. Then we have the climate policy integration. In 2008, the government of India came up with the National Action Plan on Climate Change. Now, this had sub-plans, for example, in the form of National Solar Mission, National Water Mission, Green India Mission, National Mission on Enhanced Energy Efficiency, on Sustainable Habitats, right? We also have the State Action Plan for Climate Change, primarily meant to make sure that the cities and districts in various states, they have robust planning architecture with respect to handling the ill effects of climate change. Then we have the Urban Development Mission. So we have been focusing in the year 2015. We had two very important schemes. The very first is the Smart Cities Mission. So the very objective was that for the 100 cities, we'll target 100 cities and we'll integrate the information and communication technology in the overall service delivery mechanism of these cities. Whatever services these cities are providing, we'll integrate the ICT, information communication technology. For example, in the form of traffic management or prevention of crimes, right? Then we have Amrut, Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation. It was launched way back in the year 2015. It focused upon three very important areas. First is water supply. Second is sewerage. And third is drainage, right? Focus upon almost 500 cities. Then in the year 2021, we came up with Amrut 2.0. The very objective was to make the kind of goals we have achieved in the Amrut first more progressive. And it focused upon the universalization of two things, water supply and the sewerage management. Focus upon making sure that our cities are water secure. Right? Note these terms and write when you are writing the answer. Right? Use these terms in your answer. Then other things, for example, we had the housing and informal settlement security. The government came up with the PM Awas Yojana, which have the components of disaster resilient infrastructure in place. Then we also have the in situ slum redevelopment, making sure that whatever slums we have, they need to be redeveloped, factoring the aspect of climate resilience. We also have the affordable renting housing complexes, right? Then we have early warning and risk mapping. We have the very important agency, Indian Meteorological Department, IMD, which basically gives the impact-based forecasting, that what can be the impact of this particular disaster, cyclone or urban flooding. It uses the Doppler radar, right? It is also focusing upon the events like glacial lake outburst floods. Then we have the urban flood forecasting systems in cities like Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai. Then we have India as a partner in various global framework, for example, the UN Habitat, where it is contributing in the profiling of the cities on the basis of the sustainability framework. Then we have this Coalition for Disaster Risk Reduction, right? CDRI. Now this is one of the Indian initiative which India came up with in the G20, right? Then we have the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction from 2015 till 2030 for disaster risk reduction. So these are the important steps which we have taken. So what should be the way forward? The very first is that we need to focus upon climate sensitive urban planning. We need to factor in the ill effects of climate change and make sure that whatever planning we are doing for the urban areas, that should be made robust with respect to the ill effects of climate change. Urban flood risk zonation must be done. Whatever areas in a particular urban area are low-lying, which are more prone to the floods, they must be mitigated. Proper adaptation mechanisms need to be provided. Then we have slope-sensitive building codes must be there. For those areas which are in the slopes, on the hill slopes, proper building codes must be followed with respect to the construction. Then inclusive master plans. Whatever master plans we are having for the urban areas, they need to incorporate the effects of the climate change. Then we have drainage and spawn city approach. Very, very important. Over here, what we can do is we can go for the nature-based solutions. When we are talking about the spawn cities, what it means is that let's say we have urban flood in a particular area or torrential rains. The city or the urban area must be in a capacity to absorb that particular water. How that can take place? If we go with the nature-based solutions in terms of rainwater harvesting, you must have seen those blocks or the gravel, which is the gravel pavement on the roads, which very easily absorbs the water and it also fills the aquifers in the ground, right? Or we can go with the flood management, floodplains management, the wetland conservation, right? Or let's say in some areas, in some coastal areas, we have the mangroves. So what we have been witnessing is the deletion or the obliteration of these mangroves for the construction projects. That should not be done. For example, we are witnessing in the Sundarbans. So we can go with the reclamation of these mangroves so that that can provide a kind of a fence, a barrier with respect to the storm surges, what we are doing in Mumbai, right? Urban wetlands, rainwater harvesting, floodplains. Then we have slum specific resilience. There has to be focus upon the slum upgradation, providing them the basic minimum urban amenities so that whenever we have a disaster or even a pandemic, they are able to manage it. Then we have insurance. They must be insured. We have the rich people who are insured. They live in proper posh gated communities, but not the poor people. Then we have the shelters in terms of the cooling shelters or in terms of providing those areas where these people can live in extreme heat events or extreme, even the winter season, right? Then we have the governance reforms. The metropolitan development authorities in various urban cities, they need to be empowered so that they can basically penalize those who are flouting the norms. For example, the coastal zone regulation norms, right? Next, we have the resilience budgeting. The budgeting with respect to the cities must incorporate some aspects of preservation of the green belts or preservation of the floodplains, making sure that these floodplains are not encroached, right? Then we have disaster auditing. Whatever disaster risk mechanisms we are adopting, they must be audited by a third party, that whether it's just on paper or effective actions have been taken or not. Then we have data and technology integration. We can have, we are having the artificial intelligence and we are using it in various domains. Why not use in predicting the extreme weather events or coming up with effective solutions with the help of AI, right? The climate risk taxation must be there. So there can be a kind of property taxation based upon the climate risk in a particular area where the rich people can give more of funds. They need to be taxed more. This would also be a progressive taxation. So what we are trying to say is, whenever we are talking about the quality of life in urban areas, you cannot just say that on the basis of how smart the city is, how much technology we have integrated, how much world-class infrastructure we have provided. You cannot judge on solely on these parameters. We need to also incorporate that what is the condition or how much capable that particular city is to bear the consequences of the ill effects of climate change, be it the urban flooding, and how much it is in a position to protect the most vulnerable sections in that particular urban area. So that is where the urban resilience becomes very important. Let's have a mains practice question. It says, Indian cities are becoming statistically prosperous. Economic growth is being witnessed, but physically fragile in the face of increasing climate extremes. In this context, discuss the key challenges that weaken the urban resilience in India and also suggest a climate-sensitive and equity-oriented urban resilience framework for Indian cities. Very important topic, can be asked in the mains. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do like this particular video and also let us know in the comment section and do write this particular answer. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the man-animal conflicts. What we have been witnessing in the last few decades is that as the pace of development and growth is increasing, the humans have encroached a lot of forest areas. Deforestation has taken place, primarily because of their own needs. And as a result, a lot of animal species come out in the open. And this has resulted in more of interactions between the humans and the wildlife in a negative manner. And a lot of conflicts have taken place, resulted into the deaths of both humans and the animals. Now, what are the reasons? You will have to understand. Primarily, the reason for the deforestation is the unsustainable mode of development we are following. Let us take into consideration the increasing food security needs. So we need more of agricultural lands, right? So therefore, the forests have been deforested, or the exploration and the exploitation of various mineral resources. For that, the forests have been uprooted. And therefore, a lot of these animals have been coming out in the open. Also, in many cases, what we see is that we have the farmlands in the vicinity of these forests. And during the night times, we have the animals like the bison or the deer or the nilgai who come out in the open and destroy the crops. Primarily, the crops which are cultivated by the small and marginal farmers who do not have any other form of livelihood options. So this negatively affects the farmers also. And as a result, many of the times, retaliatory killings of the animals have taken place, impulsive killings have taken place. So this is a very serious issue. So we have this particular column which says that according to a report by Worldwide Fund for Nature and the United Nations Environment Program, this kind of human-wildlife conflict has become one of the main threats to the long-term survival of many emblematic species in India. Very important species, elephants, tigers, right? About 186 elephants were killed after being hit by a train across India from 2009 till 2020. According to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Assam accounted for the highest number of elephants casualties on the railway tracks. Then we have the states like West Bengal and Odisha. Agriculture near the forest draws the elephants into the human fields, increasing the conflict. So as I told you, in the vicinity areas, we have these animals coming out in the open and they destroy the farmlands. So it's negatively affecting both the farmers and also the animals. The National Human-Wildlife Conflict Mitigation Strategy and Action Plan seeks to address the key drivers of the conflict: habitat fragmentation, right? So we have basically, since the deforestation has taken place, it has resulted in the habitat fragmentation. The corridors for these animals have been damaged corridors and retaliatory killings. So we'll see what this particular conflict is all about and what can be the way forward with respect to this particular issue. Very, very important topic. Now, how do we define the human-wildlife conflict? See, the definition over here, it takes into the perspective of the interests of the humans. We are looking at the picture from the perspective of the humans. But what you'll have to understand is that it also compromises the interests of the wildlife. Because, see, ultimately the reason why these animals are coming out in the open, because of the unsustainable development models we are following, we have destroyed their forested areas, and therefore the animals are coming out in the open. So we'll have to factor in that aspect also. What does it mean? It defines the struggles that emerge when the presence or the behavior of wildlife poses a threat to the human interests. So we are taking at the center stage the interests of the humans. But in a broader sense, it is also compromising the interests of the animals also. Negative impacts on the people and the wildlife usually occurs in the areas where wildlife and human population overlap. Yes, especially in those farmlands in the vicinity of the forested areas. We have these nilgais or the other animals who come out in the open, the elephants, and destroy the crops. And as a retaliatory killing, and let's say if you have a tiger or an elephant killing a particular person in the area, you'll have people killing that particular animal, what we call as retaliatory killing. Or even if the animal has not killed any human, there would be impulsive killings, preemptive killings. Because that is, we often say that survival is a natural instinct. So because of the natural instinct, many of the times the humans have killed the animals. Now, can you just tell me that what is that particular term in ecology which defines the overlap of two ecological domains? What do we call that, right? Management of human-wildlife conflict is primarily responsibility of the respective state and union territory government, and it is for that reason that Kerala has also declared the human-wildlife conflict as a state-specific disaster. Because of the gravity of the problem the state has been facing, it has been declared as the state-specific disaster, shifting the responsibility to the State Disaster Management Authority. Now, how or what is the kind of gravity of this particular issue? Let me give you the number. So in the year 2023, almost 606 people were killed because of the elephants, and almost 82 people were killed because of the tigers. Now this number has increased from 574 with respect to the elephants in 2019 to 606 and to 82 from 49 with respect to the tigers. 49 people were killed because of the tigers in the year 2019, and it has increased to almost 82. 606 and 82 human deaths were reported in 2023-24 in various Indian states due to elephant and tiger attacks. That is what points towards the increasing instances of human-wildlife conflict. Now, what are the causative factors, the key drivers, the reasons for the increasing human-wildlife conflict? There can be some natural reasons also. We cannot just say that it is only because of the anthropogenic factors, the human-induced factors. Let's say there is a seasonal change. Let's say there is a change from summers to autumn, right? Or let's say there's a change from winters to spring. So many of the animals, they come out in the open. They have their migration patterns. And whenever they come out in the open from the forested areas, the interactions between the humans and the wildlife increase. And that has led to, in many cases, the killings of both humans as well as the animals. Seasonal changes, natural calamities. Let's say flood takes place. So animals would come out in the open. Or let's say a kind of urban flooding takes place anywhere. So in this particular case, we have had the instance recently in the states of Uttarakhand, where a lot of debris came from the mountains in these forested areas, the Gloff events. And because of that, many of the animals came outside, right? Extreme weather events, torrential rainfalls, melting sea ice in the Arctic has increased the probability of negative human polar bear interactions. Then we have anthropogenic drivers, human-induced. What are the reasons? Changes in the land use because of habitat loss, expansion of agriculture. See, this is very much, let's say we have a particular forested area, right? And over here, the government comes up with a strategic project of a linear road project, which is very important. It has to be done, strategic nature. So what would happen is that there would be a kind of fragmentation in this particular habitat. In this particular habitat has been fragmented into two areas, A and B. And if effective corridors are not provided, then migration patterns would not be able to take place. And that would have an effect on these animals. The animals would rather come out in the open, right? Expansion of agriculture, infrastructure development, including the urbanization, linear infrastructure, the roadways, the railways, extractive industries, exploration of the minerals, right, over a particular forested area. Let's say the study has been done, research has been done, and it has come to the conclusion that a particular area in Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh, it has a lot of coal reserves, but that is a forested area. And the government does all these environment clearances, and then it uproots the forest. Where would the animals go? They would naturally come out in the open, right? Wildlife drivers, changes in the animals' life cycles, movement patterns of animals. There are some animals who have a particular movement pattern. They stay in the forest for a period of time and then they come out in the open. Presence of invasive alien species. Let's say we have a particular area, forested area, and by any reason, an invasive alien species comes over there. So many a times what can happen is that the animal who survives on that particular species, it would come out because the invasive alien species would root out the native species on which that animal depends. So the animal would come out in the open. So that can be a causative factor. Now, what is the impact of human-animal conflict? Impact on the wildlife, very important to understand. We cannot just take into consideration the impact on the humans. That is obviously very important. But ultimately, the reason is the unsustainable model of development we have followed. It threatens the very survival of the species, of those very important species like elephants or tigers, because of the retaliation and preemptive killings, impulsive killings. See, retaliation is when you have a particular animal, elephant or tiger, it has killed a particular human. So there is a feeling of retaliation in the humans living nearby, and therefore that animal gets killed. But there can also be the impulsive or preemptive. Before the human gets killed, the humans living in that particular area, they kill that particular animal. Then we have impact on the ecosystems. Because of these animals coming out in the open, there is a damage to the crops and the livestock. We have the cattles. Many of the farmers have these cattles. And we have these predators who come out in the open, tigers or the leopards, and take that cattle with themselves. So that is also a loss to the farmers, and it basically alters the predator-prey balance. Next, we have the impacts on social dynamics. Also, one thing which you'll have to understand is that we have a lot of small and marginal farmers. More than 86% of the farmers in the country, they are small and marginal farmers. They have very small patches of land, and they do not have diversified sources of living. They are only dependent upon that particular cropland. And once the animal comes and destroys the crop, the whole productivity, the livelihood productivity of that particular farmer, it is collapsed. That is what you'll have to understand. Impact on social dynamics. There is a discord between farmers and conservationists. See, we have two lobbies. Farmers have their own concerns, genuine concerns. Their animals are coming outside, destroying our farmland, our crops, and therefore we would kill them. On the other hand, we have these conservationists, primarily in the urban areas, who say that we need to protect these animals, protect the forests. So there is a kind of discord which gets created. Then we have impact on the local communities, vulnerable, poor, marginalized communities, as I told you, the small and marginal farmers. Then we have the impact on commodity production. See, in many places, for example, in the states like Karnataka, we have a lot of commercial plantation which takes place, where the farmers come out in a contract. They have a contract with the business entities. And once you have the destruction of these crops by the animals, it not only compromises the interests of the farmers but also those businesses, because we have the food processing industries also, which are in many places involved in many states. So the interests of both the farmers and the businesses, they are compromised, decrease the productivity and profitability. Other impacts, it affects the livelihood insecurity, food insecurity, translocation of the animals takes place, right? What are the initiatives which have been taken to mitigate the human-wildlife conflict? The very first is the creation of Protected Areas Network, Wildlife Protection Act 1972, national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, conservation reserves, community reserves, those areas which are where the entry of the others is prohibited or regulated, so that it maintains the integrity of that particular area, maintains the conservation in that particular area. Species-specific guidelines have been issued by Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. For example, with respect to the vultures, with respect to the other animals, the deers. Then we have centrally sponsored specific schemes, for example, the Project Tiger, very important, Project Elephant, where a continuous source of funding is also provided for the conservation of these species. Then we have National Wildlife Action Plan of 2017 until 2035, very comprehensive. There is a chapter which deals with the animal-wildlife conflict, the human-wildlife conflict in this particular plan, which talks about what can be the measures which can be taken. Then we have National Human-Wildlife Conflict Mitigation Strategy and Action Plan, which the article also talks about, which talks about the harmonious coexistence and overall well-being of both animals as well as the humans. See, we cannot just look at the picture in an isolation. We cannot just take sides with respect to the humans or with respect to the animals, right? So what should be the way forward? The focus has to shift. We need to shift the focus from the conflict to the coexistence. And this is very much possible in many of the countries, in developed countries. They have taken steps to make sure that effective conservation mechanisms are in place, which focus upon both these aspects of the human interest also and the animal interest also. Holistic and integrated approach. For example, we have the Wildlife Protection Act, which says that in a particular state, if the chief wildlife warden feels that the instances of human-wildlife conflict have been increasing, then he can take proactive steps, right? Holistic understanding of the conflict is very much required. That is, you'll have to understand the issues, that what are the causative factors. Is it more because of the anthropogenic factors, or it is more because of the natural reasons? And accordingly, the steps must be taken. Building barriers. There can be the establishment of physical barriers in the form of barbed wires. Or we can also go with biofencing. You must have seen that many of the farmers have planted the chilies, which in a way prohibit the animals from trespassing to their areas, right? Then we have enabling the policy framework. Worldwide Fund for Nature has suggested that this aspect of human-wildlife conflict, it is very important to be factored in various protocols and conventions, because it is compromising the survival of both the animals as well as the humans and the economic aspects of the humans as well. And therefore, what it has said is that we need to integrate this in the Sustainable Development Goals or the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, because it in one way or the other is also compromising the biological diversity aspect, right? Role of community is very important, because if there would be a kind of a temperament which develops, which focuses upon the impulsive killings or the retaliatory killings, then that would have an adverse impact on the interests of the animals. Community-based volunteers or the rapid response teams must be instituted in many of the places. What the state governments have done is that they have constituted the rapid response teams on the voluntary basis, and that has led to a kind of a very peaceful environment being developed with respect to the animals and the humans, right? Friends of wild animals, what they call themselves. So what you'll have to understand, it's a very grave threat. It's a very serious situation, because it is not only compromising the interests of the humans, but also that of the animals. And therefore, effective steps must be taken so as to make sure. The most important step which we can take is to make sure that we don't disturb the balance with respect to these forested areas. They should not be encroached upon. That's the most important thing, right? Let's have a mains practice question. It's a 10-marker question. Discuss the causes of the human-wildlife conflict in India and suggest a viable strategy for mitigation while ensuring both wildlife conservation and human well-being. 10 marks, 150 words. Do write a particular answer in this question. Let's go to the next section. Coming to the simplified section, we have the first topic, which says that the union government is not considering any proposal to classify the denotified tribes. Let's first understand that what is this particular concept of denotified tribes. See, during the British times, we had the Britishers who classified certain tribes based on certain attributes as criminal tribes. What they perceived on the arbitrary basis that there are some tribes which we would categorize as criminal tribes. So they enacted a law known as the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871. What they perceived that they have certain attributes which are of criminal nature, and therefore we declared them as criminal tribes. It was mandated that these tribes should register themselves with the local magistrate. If they fail to do so, they would be treated as a criminal, that they have done a particular crime. Similarly, we have the other types of tribes known as nomadic tribes. You must have heard about the word Banjara. Those people who do not have a permanent land for their living, who roam from one place to the other, nomads. Then we also have semi-nomadic tribes. After the independence in the year 1952, it was thought that this is a kind of a stereotype, that you are notifying some tribes as criminal tribes. So they were denotified. And therefore, right now, the conception which we use is denotified tribes. I hope it is clear. In the year 2014, the government of India constituted a particular committee under the chairmanship of Bikuji Ramje Date, saying that certain of these communities, that what all communities reside in what all states, they must be classified. There has to be a robust classification of denotified tribes, nomadic tribes, and semi-nomadic tribes. And in the year 2017, the Idate Commission gave its particular report. And it definitely said that we also need to come up with kind of developmental policies for these DNTs, nomadic tribes, and semi-nomadic tribes. Because the kind of living standards which they have, it's very poor. They're very poor, marginalized, and vulnerable. So we need to come up with developmental initiatives. Then the government of India basically constituted, it asked the Anthropological Survey of India to do an ethnographic study of these people, so that these denotified tribes, nomadic tribes, and semi-nomadic tribes, they can be reclassified into the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and OBCs, so that they can also get the benefit of the reservation. Right? And Anthropological Survey of India has definitely gave its recommendation. But these recommendations have not been accepted by the government. And as of now, what the government has said is that there is no proposal to classify these denotified tribes into SC, STs, or OBCs. That is what you'll have to understand. Right? Let's go through this. 5 years after the Union government initiated the ethnographic effort to classify 268 denotified nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes, the Union government told the Parliament that it is not considering any proposal to classify these communities into the SCs, STs, or OBCs. This comes 2 years after the Anthropological Survey of India completed the ethnographic study on the basis of the ethnicity of these tribes. Tracing back the ethnicity, they have classified, they have done a research, Anthropological Survey of India, and recommended their reclassification. In their report submitted in 2023, the Anthropological Survey of India had recommended fresh classification of 85 of these communities, reclassification of 9 others, and noted that many others would be partially classified. So Anthropological Survey of India has definitely recommended the reclassification into SCs, STs, and OBCs, so that they can have these denotified and nomadic tribes and semi-nomadic tribes can have the benefits of the reservation. This exercise was initiated in 2019 after the government constituted the Developmental Welfare Board for the denotified nomadic and semi-nomadic communities. The Idate Commission's report of 2017 flagged the need for these communities to get a proper classification into SC, ST, or OBC list. So the Idate Commission talked about this, that these communities must be reclassified as SCs or STs or OBCs in whatever category the study comes out with, right? So that these communities can have the reservation benefit. Responding to questions in the Rajya Sabha on Wednesday about the study and the government's proposal to finalize the classification of these communities, the Social Justice Ministry said there is no proposal under consideration. Civil society organizations representing the denotified communities in North India have been pushing the government to recognize them as separate scheduled category, which is similar to that of SCs, STs, and OBCs. This rationale has been, the kind of reasoning which has been given is that very few states are issuing community certificates to these communities, in the absence of which they are unable to claim the benefits maintained for them. Affirmative action, right? The Development Welfare Board is already administering a particular scheme known as the SEED scheme. We'll talk about this for the welfare of the denotified, nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes. A major reason for the slow uptake of the SEED scheme was the lack of clarity on how to classify these communities. I hope it is clear. Now, let's go through this. Denotified tribes, also known as Vimukt Jati, are the tribes that were listed originally under the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871 as criminal tribes. Once a tribe becomes notified as criminal, all the members were required to register with the local magistrates, failing which they would be charged with a crime under the Indian Penal Code. After independence, this act was repealed in 1952 and the communities were denotified. That is the reason we call them denotified tribes. Nomadic tribes are the communities who usually do not have a land and move from one place to the others, the Banjaras. The DNTs, NTs and SNTs are among the most neglected, marginalized and economically deprived communities, and therefore there's a need for affirmative action, with most living a life of destitution, poverty, impoverishment. Historically, these communities never had access to the private land or home ownership and use forests and grazing lands for their livelihood and residential use. Status of DNTs, NTs and SNTs in India. In India, roughly almost 10% of the population is denotified and nomadic. Please pay attention, because since the Hindu has covered this, there is a very much possibility of UPSC asking, there can be a question with respect to these communities in the prelims. While the number of denotified tribes is about 150, the population of nomadic tribes consists of around 500 different communities. In the year 2014, the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment constituted a National Commission for DNTs, NTs and SNTs under the chairmanship of Bhikkhu Ramji Idate, for a period of 3 years to prepare a state-wise list of castes belonging to DNTs, NTs and SNTs, to suggest appropriate measures in respect of denotified and nomadic tribes that may be undertaken by the central government or the state government. In 2017, the Commission prepared a draft list of these communities. Based on the Commission's recommendation, the Ministry constituted the Development and Welfare Board for the denotified, nomadic and semi-nomadic communities. The board has been mandated to formulate and implement welfare and developmental policies and programs for these communities. We also had another commission. The Renke Commission of 2008 was earlier commissioned to identify and list the DNT communities. What is this SEED program? It was launched by the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment for the welfare of denotified, nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes. It has been formulated for the families having income from all sources, rupees 2.5 lakh or less per annum, and not availing any benefits from a similar scheme of the center or the state government, to provide free competitive exam coaching, health insurance, housing assistance, right, and livelihood initiatives at the community level, and financial assistance for the construction of houses will be provided to the members of DNTs, the NTs, nomadic tribes and SNTs. An amount of 200 crores has been allocated for the scheme to be spent over 5 years from financial year 21-22 till financial year 25-26. But what we have been seeing is that the scheme is not very effective, primarily because there are issues with respect to the classification of these communities. I hope it is clear. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, we have a column which talks about the discrimination and stigma against the people who are suffering with respect to leprosy, the disease of leprosy. So we've had a research done by the National Human Rights Commission, who says that almost 97 laws in the country, both the central as well as the state laws, they continue to use derogatory terms for the people who suffer from leprosy. And therefore, the Supreme Court has taken an action and said that these laws must be reformed, right? So let's go through this. The Supreme Court of India's intervention to battle the stigma and discrimination in the case of leprosy is a corrective action that could not have been delayed any further. On a direction from the court, the NHRC recently submitted that 97 central and state laws continues to contain the provisions that discriminate against the persons with leprosy. Even the laws are themselves discriminatory, the kind of language which is being used in the laws. In sum and substance, these provisions deny access to things such as basic public transport and public spaces, right to run for elected office, and access to employment or running a business venture. So if the state itself, along with its laws, if it is discriminatory, how we can expect a kind of a welfare state? That is a question. The court was hearing a batch of petitions contending that there were a number of provisions across central and state statutes, the laws that discriminate against persons with leprosy. Now, this disease is caused by the bacteria, which is Mycobacterium leprae. Leprosy is among the earliest known infections to affect humans, with skeletal evidence dating back to 2000 BC. Today, India continues to report almost 57% of the leprosy cases worldwide. So we share a kind of a disproportionate burden with respect to the disease of leprosy, with genetic predisposition and living in unsanitary conditions raising the susceptibility. Now, put out a comprehensive document that recommended early identification, timely treatment, rehabilitation, and removing the discriminatory practices to ensure the dignity and equal access to fundamental rights for persons with leprosy. This includes a plea to the center to enact a law to replace the derogatory terminology that persists in the law of the land, and a pointed recommendation to the Unique Identification Authority of India, UIDAI, which deals with the Aadhaar aspect, to promote the use of iris scans for Aadhaar enrollment. Because when a person suffers from leprosy, there is a kind of a nerve damage, and therefore it affects the fingertips. So therefore, for these persons, there should be the incorporation of iris scanning. Given that plethora of medical advancements have taken place, have enabled leprosy to be a non-infectious condition and be fully curable with the right interventions. The judges directed all the states and UTs to submit reports detailing the steps that they have initiated in this regard. In fact, armed with the evidence that the NHRC has provided, the center and the states must set themselves urgent task of removing these provisions and launching the remedial actions for the safeguard of people suffering from leprosy. Let's also talk about the very important National Human Rights Commission. I have taken the snippet from the website itself so that you can understand that how much important the content on these website is, especially from the perspective of UPSC prelims. Established under the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993, the very objective is protecting and promoting life, liberty, equality, and dignity for all. The National Human Rights Commission of India was established on 12th October 1993. The statute under which it is established is the Protection of Human Rights Act of 1993, and it has been amended in 2019 as amended by the Protection of Human Rights Act Amendment Act of 2019. Section 2, subclause 1, subclause D of the Protection of Human Rights Act of 1993 defines human right as a right relating to life, liberty, equality, and dignity of the individual, guaranteed by the Constitution or embodied in the international covenants. So we have different covenants. International Covenant on the protection of the civil and political rights, economic rights, the social rights. It is in conformity with the Paris Principles, very important. So we have a set of principles which have been incorporated, known as the Paris Principles, which basically talk about that how autonomous the rights protection body is in the country. Paris Principles, very important, do have a look. Adopted at the first international workshop on the National Institutions for the Protection and Promotion of the Human Rights held in Paris in 1991 and endorsed by the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1993. The NHRC is an embodiment of India's concern for the protection and promotion of human rights. What is the mandate? The NHRC's mandate is to protect and promote the human rights in India, ensuring compliance with the constitutional provisions and the other laws also, statutory laws also. It investigates the human rights violations and negligence by the public servants, the police authorities, for example, in the case of torture, for example, custodial torture, intervenes in the court proceedings involving such violations, and monitors the conditions in prisons and other institutions, making sure that the under-trials, we have a lot of under-trials in the prisons, whether their condition of living is right or not. Here is a more detailed breakdown. We have the inquiry and investigation. NHRC investigates the cases of human rights violations and negligence in preventing such violations by public servants. It can intervene in the court proceedings involving human rights violations. It undertakes visit to the jails. Then promotion and awareness. The NHRC promotes human rights awareness through educational programs or other IEC campaigns, right? Information, education, and communication campaigns, other outreach methods. It encourages the NGOs and institutions working in the human rights to promote awareness. It studies the international human rights treaties and recommends their effective implementation. Then we have research and recommendation. The NHRC undertakes and promotes research in the fields of human rights. It reviews safeguards for the human rights under the Constitution and recommends measures for their effective implementation. Many times the government also can ask the NHRC to basically tell the government that what all steps can be incorporated to protect the overall ambit of the human rights. It can recommend the compensation or prosecution against the guilty public servants. Other key functions, it can request the public records and copies from different courts or offices. It submits the annual report to the central and the state governments. It monitors the functioning of the mental hospitals and protection homes under the Supreme Court remit. What is the composition of the commission? Very important. There can be a question asked in the prelims. As per Section 3 of the Protection of Human Rights Act of 1993, the composition of the commission is defined. We have the chairperson who has been a Chief Justice of India or a judge of a Supreme Court. So it's not mandatory that he or she has to be only a Chief Justice of India. He or she can also be a judge of the Supreme Court. One member who has been a judge of the Supreme Court. One member who has been the Chief Justice of a High Court. 3 members out of them, one should be a woman, to be appointed from amongst the person having the knowledge or practical experience with respect to the human rights. Then we have some ex officio members, right? The chairperson of the National Commission for the Backward Classes, National Commission for Minorities, National Commission for the Protection of Child Rights, National Commission for the Scheduled Castes, National Commission for the Scheduled Tribes, National Commission for the Women, and the Chief Commissioner for the Persons with Disabilities shall be deemed to be the members of the Commission in the discharge of their functions. So they are ex officio members, right? There shall be a Secretary General who shall be the Chief Executive Officer of the Commission and shall, subject to the control of the chairperson, exercise all administrative and financial powers. So this is what you need to know with respect to NHRC. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the importance of critical minerals, including the rare earth elements. See, what you'll have to understand is that we are witnessing a kind of the emerging technologies and new sectors have been coming in, which demand the usage of certain important elements known as critical minerals, right? Including the rare earth elements. For example, we have the electric vehicles. For example, we have the renewable energy components, including the solar panels and the wind turbines. We have some of the very important technological instruments which use these critical minerals. But what you'll have to understand is that the reserves of these critical minerals and the rare earth elements, it is positioned in very few countries, and not just the reserves, the production aspect. Very few countries, and specifically China, have the command with respect to the processing of these elements. So therefore, it becomes very important for a country like India, which is also investing a lot in the emerging technology, to have its own ambit of the production and refining of these minerals, including the recycling abilities also. And therefore, the government recently has launched a particular mission of more than to the tune of 7,000 crores, which focuses upon the rare earth magnets. What the authors in this article have been focusing upon is that the policy itself, the mission itself acknowledges that we cannot just focus upon the production aspect. We also need to focus upon the refining aspect, because more than 90% of the refining ability or the capacity with respect to certain very important minerals, it is with China. That is what you'll have to understand. The Union Cabinet's 7,280 crore rare earth magnet scheme recognizes that mining without processing is merely exporting the prosperity. We should not just focus upon the mining of these elements, but rather we should also focus upon the processing aspect of it, right? See, again, why we are not able to focus that much upon the processing is because the processing of these elements is very technologically intensive. There are a lot of series of steps which are there, and there has to be a very intensive processing, and therefore we need to focus upon this aspect. Similarly, the G20 framework on critical minerals places value creation through refining and manufacturing at the center of mineral security. For India, this is crucial because India has reformed the mining laws, but still lacks large-scale processing and refining capacity. See, while we are focusing upon the exploration part, we are focusing upon the aspects of mining, but we haven't focused that much upon the refining aspects, right? This makes India highly vulnerable to global supply shocks. Why global supply shocks? Because the capacity with respect to these critical minerals, the processing and the mining, it is almost completely with respect to China, right? China basically has a dominance in this aspect, and China uses the supply of these critical minerals as a strategic tool, right? Every green or high-tech product begins at the refinery stage, not the factory. The solar panels, ultra-pure polysilicon, electric vehicles, battery-grade lithium, nickel, cobalt, graphite, wind turbines, magnet-ready rare earths. So these are the critical minerals, including the rare earths. And therefore, we need adequate, robust refining capacity. Yet, most refining happens outside India, exposing clean energy transition. If China uses it as a strategic tool, which it has been doing with respect to US, And if it stops the supply of these critical minerals, that would invariably compromise certain very important domains in the country. For example, the clean energy transition, we have set our goals, Panchamrit goals, nationally determined contributions. How we would be able to get this into reality if we don't have the adequate supply of these critical minerals? Semiconductors, telecom, automobiles, we have the usage of these automobile semiconductors in the in various components, right? Pharmaceuticals, defense production, various defense platforms have been using these critical minerals. If we do not have the adequate supply, how would we be able to basically manufacture these high-end defense platforms to foreign supply disruptions? Geopolitical risk, China's dominance in refining. The biggest vulnerability lies in the midstream segment, that is the processing and refining. Mining is not that difficult. You can easily mine. But what is more important is what is more technologically intensive. What is more problematic is the aspects of processing and mining. China controls over 90% of the global refining of rare earths and graphite. Do remember, you can also use this information in the mains answer, right? More than 90% of the rare earths and graphite. China has tightened the export controls on rare earth and battery technologies, battery storage systems, expanded the restrictions, citing national security. Ongoing US-China trade tensions have worsened the India's exposure. So China has, in a way, reduced the supply of these elements to US. So that has also exposed the vulnerability with respect to India. That can also happen with India. Thus, without domestic processing, India remains strategically exposed. India's mining reforms, what all things or steps we have taken? India has significantly amended the Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act. Other reforms include the exploration licenses. We have been more open with respect to the licenses, with respect to the exploration, national mineral auctions, mining associated minerals, national mineral exchange. We have taken all these steps, but we have certain issues. However, these reforms help India extract and they do not help India refine. So though we are able to, because of these steps, we are able to have a conducive environment with respect to the extraction of these minerals. But what about the processing? That remains a very important question. India still imports nearly all of its lithium, nickel and cobalt. Can you just imagine? Lithium, a core element of the battery storage systems. Almost most of the supply is imported in India. How much vulnerable we are with respect to the supplies of these elements? That remains a very important question. India's existing strength, 7 critical minerals already mined and processed. A study done by the Council on Energy, Environment and Water shows that India already handles copper, graphite, silicon, tin, titanium, rare earth and zirconium. But refining is weak in the scale or quality. Though we are taking few steps, we have taken some small steps with respect to refining, but there are issues with respect to the quality of the refined product we have got. Limiting the industrial use. If the quality is not adequate, we will not be able to use in the industrial applications. Recycling as a new strategic resource. Recycling is also very important. We should not just focus upon the refining attributes or the capacity. Rather, we should also focus upon how, see, we have a lot of electronic equipments in your homes also. What you will find is a lot of used mobile phones or other electronic gadgets. Every of these gadgets has certain component of the critical minerals or the rare earth elements. Why not we go for recycling? That remains a very important question. India has approved a 1500 critical minerals recycling scheme. Significant secondary mineral sources, coal fly ash, 250 plus million tons annually. So we have the thermal power plants producing the coal fly ash. In the coal fly ash, we have a lot of rare earth and critical minerals which can be extracted from it, right? Then we have the red mud from aluminium plants. The waste with respect to the bauxite. From the bauxite, we get the aluminium. So we also have the red mud. We can basically extract from it the rare earths and the critical minerals. Then we have, so from the coal fly ash, we can have the rare earths. From the red mud, we can have the gallium. From the zinc residues, we can have the cobalt. From the steel slag, we can have vanadium. So adequate technologies, those technologies which are practically feasible, which are viable, economically viable, must be started. And they must be implemented so that we can extract these rare earths and the other elements from these waste byproducts. Pilot studies done by the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research and various IITs show that recovery is technologically feasible. Embedding recovery units in critical minerals processing parks can enable the scale. So the recovery units must be installed. That is very important. What should be the 5-step strategy which India should adopt, according to the authors. The very first is turn centers of excellence into innovation hubs. Under the National Critical Mineral Mission, 9 centers of excellence must drive what they should work. In addition, is applied research. That in what all areas we can use these critical minerals, apart from the areas which we already know. Then we have high purity material development. How we can increase or enhance the quality of the product. How we can have a more refined quality product. And commercial scale technologies. Right now we are having the pilot projects. How we can make a kind of a project which is commercially viable, right? Then IITs, NITs and industries and think tanks should do life cycle modeling with respect to from the extraction to the processing to the refining and the usage and the end of life. Then we have cost benefit analysis. The cost with respect to the processing should not be more than the product itself. So the cost benefit analysis must also be done. Focus must shift from the lab research to factory ready technology, right? What should be the step 2? Unlock the secondary resources for recovery. Instead of relying only on fresh mining, India must recover the minerals from fly ash, again recycling, red mud and industrial residues, integrate recovery into the processing parks. So the recovery units must be integrated in the processing parks itself. Step 3, build a skilled processing workforce. Skilled labor is very important. Critical mineral refining needs hydrometallurgy, right, which is a very important part of material physics, and advanced purification techniques. The 100 crore National Critical Mission, Skill Mineral Mission, skill allocation should use the fund for training the trainer programs, diploma level technical courses, so that even the person who is working on the supply chain in these refining units must have some level of skill with respect to how these things are managed. New CSIR and academic curricula, this can create thousands of high skill industrial jobs. Then we have de-risk investment through demand assurance. There is a US model. In the US, we have a very important company, which is an end-to-end company, MP Materials, which focuses upon the production, refining and processing aspect. Very important. It has collaborated with the US Department of Defense. And there is a kind of a guaranteed offtake which has been provided. What do we mean by that? What it says is that what all products you would manufacture, if no one else would buy, the government would buy. So there is a guarantee on the things which that particular company is producing. It's a collaboration between US Department of Defense and the MP Materials. Uses government offtake guarantees and price protections. Price would be protected. That India can use its proposed critical mineral stockpiling as a market stabilizer and mandate partial domestic sourcing for defense, pharmaceuticals, electronics and enforce strict quality standards for the processors. India can also learn from these examples and basically come up with these steps. Step 5, the last, link mineral diplomacy with processing capacity. India's recent overseas mineral acquisitions focus mainly on the raw ores. Future strategy should shift from buyer-seller into co-investment partnerships. We should not just come into that partnership of a buyer and seller. Rather, why not we go in the other countries and then invest over there? What China is doing. So we can invest with our entities. We have some of the very big entities, for example, the ONGC. It can have its own venture in these countries and it can invest over there. Joint processing hubs and technology sharing platforms. This would elevate India's and global value chains, right? So again, these steps can be incorporated in your answer whenever you are writing with respect to the critical minerals or the rare earth, right? The final message with respect to the article is, with China tightening the exports, the real strategic question is not about mining capacity, but about mastering the refining and processing. It's not just about extraction, rather it is also about mining and processing. If India fails here, it remains a raw material supplier. And if India succeeds, it becomes a global clean technology and advanced manufacturing hub. That is what you'll have to understand. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the volcanic eruption we have witnessed in Ethiopia's Haile Gobi. So what it has done is the eruption has led to a lot of volcanic ash, and that has affected the flight operations, right? Last week, the DGCA, the Director General for Civil Aviation, issued an advisory to the Indian airline after the Haile Gobi volcano in northern Ethiopia erupted on November 23rd for the first time in nearly 12,000 years. The eruption sent massive clouds of ash into the atmosphere, which traveled thousands of kilometers and entered the Indian airspace. Therefore, it has had effect with respect to the movements of flight, raising serious aviation safety concerns. How did the volcanic ash reach India? The eruption sent ash plumes up to a height of 14 kilometers. Winds carried the ash across the Red Sea towards Yemen and Oman, further towards Iran, and then finally into India's western airspace on November 24th. The ash exited the Indian airspace by November 25 night. It moved at almost 100 to 120 kilometers per hour at altitudes of almost 15,000 to 25,000 feet. Indian regions affected, we have the parts of Rajasthan, parts of Gujarat, Delhi NCR, Punjab and other states. The plume contained volcanic ash, sulfur dioxide, tiny glass and rock particle. It later crossed into China. Why is volcanic ash extremely dangerous for aircrafts? What are the reasons? A jet engine pulls in air. The mechanism, how the jet engine works, it pulls in the air, compresses it and mixes it with the fuel, burns it at around 1600 degrees Celsius, expels it at a very high speed, and that is what gives the thrust to the airplane. When volcanic ash enters the engine, silicate particles melt at high temperatures. They resolidify as glassy deposits, and that affects the operation of the jet engines. These deposits block the cooling holes, choke the airflow, cause engine overheating. This can result in sudden loss of power, complete engine shutdown, and cabin smoke and odor. Thus, volcanic ash is one of the most serious airborne hazards with respect to aviation. What did the DGCA order do? The DGCA advisory instructed the airline to avoid flying at affected altitudes and regions and immediately report any ash-related technical issue if it exists. Airports to inspect runways for the ash contamination and suspend or restrict the operations if required. Impact on Indian airline. Air India cancelled at least 9 flights, and other also did that. What have there been any examples? Yes. The 1982 British Airways incident, a Boeing 747 passed through the ash from Mount Galangong. All 4 engines failed, oxygen levels dropped, passenger oxygen masks were deployed, the plane descended over 25,000 feet, engines were partially restarted, visibility was severely reduced due to ash-covered windscreen, a crash into the ocean was narrowly avoided. Similarly, we had the 1989 KLM Alaska incident. Why this matters for India? This episode highlights the global nature of atmospheric hazards, India's dependence on real-time international aviation warnings, the importance of continuous airspace monitoring, strict regulator action, and precautionary cancellations. So this also shows the importance of a very important body, which is the DGCA, right? The vulnerability of long-haul aviation routes passing the Middle East, West Asia, and Africa. The long-haul flights, which go for a long distance. That is what you have to understand. Let's go to the last article. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, we have a mention of a very important body, which is International Idea Council. The Chief Election Commissioner, Ganesh Kumar, on Wednesday assumed the charge of the chairman of the Council of the Member States of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, International IDA, for 2026. What this body is all about. The International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, International IDEA. It is an intergovernmental organization established in 1995. It works to strengthen the democratic institutions and electoral processes, primarily to basically make sure that democratic principles are carried on in various countries, right? They are adhered to. International IDEA has been granted the UN observer status. Do remember, UPSC has quite frequently asked such type of questions. So it enjoys a UN observer status. The objectives of the institute are to support stronger democratic institutions and processes, more sustainable, effective and legitimate democracy. Member countries, it currently has 35 member countries with United States and Japan as observers. India is a founding member of the International IDEA. Governance, the institute's governance consists of a council of member states, a steering committee and a finance and audit committee, a board of advisors and a secretariat led by the Secretary General. Each year the council elects a chair and 2 vice chair among its member states. Core functions, its working modalities include 4 elements: knowledge production, capacity development, so as to make sure, let's say if you have a small country and it wants to basically conduct the democratic elections, so there can be a kind of the capacity development which can be taken by the International IDA with respect to that country. Advocacy as well as convening dialogues. It focuses upon 6 work streams, which are electoral processes, constitution building, democracy assessment, political participation and representation, climate change and democracy, and digitization and democracy. Where is the secretariat located? Very important, it's in Stockholm, Sweden. Do remember, because a question can be asked in the prelims. That's all for today. I hope you really enjoyed the discussion. All the very best. Thank you.